This study is an attempt to delve into the compositional process of the Ricercars by Andrea Gabrieli and characterize the techniques and devices he employed with an emphasis on counterpoint and form. Andrea Gabrieli's 24 Ricercars were published posthumously by his somewhat more famous nephew, Giovanni Gabrieli, in 3 books and in various formats and layouts, both for keyboard and for ensemble. The first book, published in 1589 and containing 7 Ricercars along with other works, appears in part book format. The second book, published in 1595, contains 11 Ricercars by the composer, along with 2 by Giovanni in intavolatura format. The third book, published in 1596, contains 6 Ricercars, along with some other works, also in intavolatura format. The present study collects them and treats them as a cohesive body of works with shared characteristics. However, there can be little doubt that the inclusion of each work in its specific book and format is far from random, as I have found shared features that characterize the works included in each book. The works are written in learned style and employ a variety of contrapuntal techniques that are at the core of the study. The relationships between these techniques and the overall form of the works may provide insights into the creative process of this leading Venetian composer. Furthermore, studying the shared characteristics of these works may shed light on their chronology. In trying to get inside the head of the composer, I have examined the works using methods inspired by the forensic analysis method, as applied by scholars such as Dreyfus, Milsom, and Schubert. These methods involve uncovering the composer's decision-making and indirectly understanding his priorities and approach to the technicalities of musical composition. It seems that in trying to answer the question, what was Gabrieli trying to do in these works, the short and for some even obvious answer could be explore contrapuntal techniques and devices. And yet, I believe that the systematic examination of the works reveals certain decisions that may help to characterize Gabrieli's exploration further. In examining the works, I found that certain decisions, such as a change in the subject or a change in the presentation or combination of certain subject, an apparent emphasis on a specific technique, and the initial planning of the invention, by which I mean in the rhetorical sense of inventio, as adopted by Dreyfus, all these could be explained as decisions made with the aim of facilitating or enhancing the exploration of counterpoint. Using this method and some comparative analysis, I have characterized some aspects of Gabrieli's compositional craft, decision-making, and exploration into the possibilities of his inventions, with an emphasis on the way his usage of contrapuntal techniques shapes these pieces. The act of ricercare, searching out or seeking, is very fitting to the compositional culture of the composer and his professional milieu. The works employ the use of a wide gamut of techniques and ideas, which combine apparent thought given to the architecture of whole pieces, and know-how of devices typical to the genre and era. The question, what was Gabrieli trying to do in these works, regards the corpus as a whole. In examining each Ricercar, the question can be, what is this piece about? My 2 main conclusions from these questions are: 1. In each Ricercar, there is a certain idea or several ideas that Gabrieli aimed to explore, and in doing so he prioritized these devices over other elements of the work. The form of the piece can be understood as the result of this exploration. And 2. In each book, there tends to be an emphasis on certain kinds of ideas, which give rise to several types of Ricercars with different characteristics. In the next 10 minutes or so, I will first describe the big picture of the types of Ricercars according to each published book, and then continue to show examples of how some of these devices were used and how the priorities and decision-making of the composer could be demonstrated in the music. Book 1, published in part books, contains subjects that are almost exclusively very singable, and in 5 out of his 7 Ricercars, emphasizes exploration of the core techniques of counterpoint, such as complexes and invertible counterpoint. Book 2, published in intavolatura format, is varied. Still, there are shared characteristics. It contains 5 pieces that deal extensively with time-related techniques, as will be demonstrated shortly, 5 that explore contrapuntal complexes, and 2 that feature more instrumental or virtuoso writing. A nice gem in this book is almost entirely dedicated to the exploration of mirror technique. Book 3, also published in intavolatura format, generally features less sophisticated contrapuntal complexes and emphasizes instrumental or virtuoso passages, with the last work in the book featuring elaborate and sophisticated episodes, where the subjects are not present. As for some terms I use, these will be familiar to those acquainted with the works of Milsom, Dreyfus, and Schubert, whom I mentioned earlier. Ingano is a device in which a sequence of notes that are solemnized are modified mid-phrase in a way that keeps the same solfege syllables in another hexachord. Stretofuga, in the context I shall use, is a formula of a canon with short temporal separation, often 1 unit, usually a fifth apart, and sometimes characterized by a zigzag in the direction and size of the intervals used, as a result of this specific style of imitation. An example that demonstrates a possible thought process of the composer is from the Ricercars del secondo tuono from the first book. This piece opens with the first subject, highlighted in light blue, entering against itself, and then the second subject, highlighted in green, entering against the first one. First, this opening complex, let's call it blue-blue-green, seems to be a staple in the first book. It opens the first 3 pieces in it, the one we've just seen, as well as Ricercars del primo tuono, and another Ricercars del secondo tuono. It also appears with some minor differences in other Ricercars in books 1 and 2. Getting back to our example, at the complex starting on bar 45, the first subject appears in the canto, and at the end of bar 46, the second subject appears in the bass below the first instead of above, like in the original complex, thus creating invertible counterpoint at the 12th. The duration of the third and fourth notes of the second subject are shortened, because using this complex while keeping the original rhythm will lead to unwanted dissonance between the voices, a 7th in the middle of bar 47. The second subject then enters in the alto as well, with the characteristic of a stretofuga, a fifth apart and 1 temporal unit apart. The rhythm of this entrance is also changed in the third note. The interesting point is that the alto could work perfectly with the canto without the change, but not with the bass, which is the more important element as it's a part of the invertible counterpoint complex. Moreover, the change in the alto makes it more imitative of the bass, which allows the presentation of another idea, the stretofuga. So it seems that the priority of the composer was to create invertible counterpoint, and the first decision that had to be made to allow it was to change the rhythm of the bass. At that point, an opportunity presented itself to create the stretofuga with the alto, which led to the decision to change its rhythm as well. A similar complex starts at bar 55, where the first subject is presented in the canto, and the second subject in the bass. But this time, the alto enters 1 temporal unit or half note before the bass, which enters an octave below rather than a fifth, and in the following bar, the tenor, which was silent in this respective part in the previous complex shown, now makes the third entrance, 2 half notes after the bass, a fifth above. This is a play on the stretofuga idea, which was presented properly 10 bars earlier, now with rising complexity and intensity. This effect is magnified by the quasi-entrance in the tenor at bar 55, the second subject with the first 2 notes omitted. which creates the effect of increased density. It seems that the composer was aiming for the oral effect experienced by the listener, rather than strict imitation. So the composer started the idea of invertible counterpoint in bar 45, made the necessary change in the rhythm of the bass, and then grasped the opportunity to include a stratofuga by adding the alto, also in an altered rhythm. 10 bars after, he developed the complex further, with the same ideas presented differently and with added voices. The next example is from the Ricercars del settimo tuono, also from the first book. Like I mentioned in the previous example, we see a similar opening complex in the same pair of voices, canto and alto. This time, the temporal difference between the two entrances of the first subject is 2.5 bars. In bar 17, there is a change in the first subject in the canto. The second note is A instead of G. This is a point of articulation, and the change is meant to allow a cadence. The subject with the same change then enters in the alto, starting on G. This time only one measure after the canto entrance. This faster entrance serves two purposes. One is to increase the intensity of the complex, and the other, which is more relevant to our discussion, is to make the same change work in the alto as well. It should be noted that no other voice is playing the subject, or a subject, at bar 19. The tenor is playing a free voice meant to support the subject, and the bass is silent. This means that while the change in the canto was needed to allow the cadence, or in other words, to support the form, the change in the alto was not necessary, and it is the result of the decision to create consistency with the change presented in the canto. In other words, the composer is telling us, it's not a bug, it's a feature. Now let's have a look at the Ricercars del primo tuono alla quarta alta from the second book. The work is based on one main subject that from bar 1 to 34 is presented mainly in half notes, which makes it 2 bars long. At bar 30, and again at bar 32, the end of the subject is changed rhythmically, and starting at bar 35, the change takes over the whole subject, giving it a dance-like 6/8 feel. These entrances are highlighted in purple. Also at bar 35, augmentation is introduced in two forms. First, the entire subject is augmented by 1:4 ratio, making each half note a double whole note, or a breve. In addition, in every augmented entrance of the subject, one or more notes are augmented further. This usually happens on the 4th or 6th note of the subject. The complexes combining these time-related techniques create increased complexity using only one subject. In bars 65 to 78, another device is thrown into the mix, ingano. This is used in 5 instances in this short part, which I call the ingano section of the Ricercars. I have labeled each instance of ingano with a number and created a hypothetical version of each of these instances without using ingano. In these versions, I included only the voices that are playing the subject, as the free voices are assumed to be written after them, completing whatever they are playing in a way that works. I have found that the hypothetical version without ingano 1 doesn't work, as it creates parallel octaves and unacceptable dissonance. There are similar problems if we don't use the ingano number 2, 4, and 5. However, the place labeled ingano 3 can work perfectly well with or without the ingano. This instance, stuck in the middle of this ingano section, seems to be unnecessary. One way of understanding this section is thinking about the composer first using ingano as a problem-solving device, allowing the full exploration of the time-related techniques, a characteristic idea of the second book, and the continuation, especially the unnecessary ingano, as a way of using this opportunity to explore the combination of ideas and strengthening the formal identity of the part. To put it another way, in this line of thought, the first ingano is the bug and the whole section is the feature. Another way of looking at it is thinking about the aim of increasing complexity and creating a climax as a starting point, ingano being the chosen device for the task and therefore used extensively. Either way, the result is a combination of several contrapuntal techniques masterfully crafted to create the climax of the piece and facilitate its form. The composer is providing a convincing answer to the learned listener's question, what can be done with this subject? A final thought about form. The last appearance of the subject is at bar 108. It starts with a 1-2 augmentation, then turns into a double or 1-4 augmentation, again starting on the 7th note, making the last note of the subject a breve. This is a summary of the different augmentation featured in the work that feels like a slowing down of the tempo before reaching a full halt in the next and final note of the Ricercars, a breve with a fermata. To sum up, we have seen a corpus of sophisticated and well-planned works dedicated to the exploration of various contrapuntal techniques. I have tried to uncover some aspects of the thought and work process of the composer, provide insights into his compositional craft and artistic values in the context of the Venetian musical culture of the time, and speculate about the order and formats of their publications. Thank you.